Sir, if you're not ordering, I'll have to ask you to leave. The words cut through the quiet hum of the Michelin-starred dining room. Mia's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. The man in the gray hoodie looked up slowly, eyes hollow but sharp, like someone used to commanding rooms far bigger than this one. Around them, silverware stilled. Her manager's gaze burned into her back. She thought he was a vagrant taking up a $500 table. He thought she was just another server. Neither knew that those 5 words would blow apart a $200 million empire and rewrite both of their fates forever. This is the story of what happened in those seconds, and how a single moment of perceived disrespect became an act of salvation. The Gilded Quill wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage. Every plate was a performance, every diner an actor in a play of wealth and power. Nestled in a quiet, cobbled street in downtown Boston, its discreet brass plaque was the only sign of the culinary theater within. For Amelia Vance, or Mia, as she insisted it was her last hope. At 24, Mia was carrying a load that would buckle most. She was a final-year computer science student at MIT on a scholarship that covered tuition, but nothing else. The else was the problem. The else was the rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her 17-year-old brother, Leo. The else was Leo's mounting medical bills, a consequence of a rare autoimmune disorder that required treatments their insurance barely acknowledged. The else was why she was now wearing a starched black apron that felt more like a straight jacket trying to balance a tray of water goblets with hands that trembled ever so slightly. Her manager, Mr. Henderson, was a man carved from polished granite with a voice as cold and smooth as the marble bar. Vance he had hissed during her orientation, his eyes scanning her for imperfections. "We do not have customers here. We have patrons. They are not here merely to eat. They are here to exist undisturbed. Your job is to be invisible, instantaneous, and impeccable. A ghost who anticipates every need. One strike, a dropped fork, a spilled drink, an unwelcome word, and you are a ghost for good." Understood. Mia had understood perfectly. This job paid more per hour than any other she could find, and the potential tips were the only thing that stood between Leo's next treatment and a mountain of debt. She couldn't afford a single strike. On her 3rd day, a Tuesday, the lunch service was a symphony of hushed conversations and the delicate clink of silverware on porcelain. Mia moved through the tables with practiced invisibility, her mind a whirlwind of order numbers and seating charts. That's when she saw him. He was sitting at table 7, the most coveted seat in the house. It was a corner booth, upholstered in deep crimson velvet, offering a panoramic view of the public garden. It was reserved for the highest echelon of patrons, senators, old money matriarchs, and the CEOs who reshaped the world between their appetizer and entree. But the man at table 7 didn't fit. He was wearing a faded, nondescript gray hoodie, the kind you'd buy in a 3-pack. His jeans were worn, and his boots looked like they had seen more miles of pavement than the inside of a limousine. His hair was an unkempt mess of dark curls, and a multi-day stubble shadowed his jaw. He wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking, he was just sitting there staring out the window, his expression lost in a private, turbulent world. Mia's stomach tightened. A loiterer, a man who'd wandered in off the street somehow, slipping past the meticulous maître, Henderson would have her head. She glanced toward the manager's station, but he was engrossed in a phone call, his back to the dining room. It was on her. She took a deep breath, pasted on her service smile, and approached the table. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I start you with some water? Perhaps a look at our wine list." The man didn't move. He didn't even blink. His gaze remained fixed on the golden leaves of the trees outside. It was as if she hadn't spoken at all. Mia felt a flush of heat creep up her neck. A few patrons at the adjacent tables were beginning to notice. She tried again, her voice a little firmer. "Sir, welcome to the Gilded Quill. May I get you something to drink? Still nothing?" He was completely lost in thought. His brow furrowed, his hands resting on the pristine white tablecloth. He looked like a man wrestling with a ghost. A knot of pure ice formed in Mia's gut. Henderson's words echoed in her ears, undisturbed, unwelcome word. But this was different. This man was a disturbance by his very presence. He was taking up the most valuable real estate in the restaurant and hadn't even acknowledged her. Every minute he sat there was a potential $500 check. She was losing money she desperately needed for Leo. The rule was clear. If a table wasn't ordering, it needed to be turned over. She retreated for a moment, busying herself by refilling a water glass at a nearby table, her eyes darting back to the man in the hoodie. He hadn't moved a muscle. He was a statue of anxiety in a temple of luxury. This couldn't continue. She had to be direct. The risk of Henderson seeing her do nothing was greater than the risk of confronting the man. One was negligence. The other was enforcing policy. She chose policy. Mia's heart hammered against her ribs. Each beat a drum of impending doom. She could feel the weight of Mr. Henderson's expectations, the phantom touch of Leo's medical bills in her pocket, and the curious judgmental stares from the surrounding tables. Table 7 was a spotlight, and she and the silent man were trapped in its beam. She approached for the third time. This time there was no smile. Her expression was a mask of professional resolve, but her mind was a frantic cacophony. "Just order something," she pleaded silently. "A coffee, a glass of water. Anything to justify your existence here." "Sir," she said, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the ambient murmur of the room. "I must insist. If you are not planning to dine with us, I will have to ask you to relinquish the table." The man's head turned slowly, as if pulled by some immense unseen weight. His eyes met hers for the first time. They weren't angry or vacant. They were a startling shade of hazel, and they were filled with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. It threw her off for a second. He looked at her, really looked at her as if she were a complex equation he was trying to solve. But he said nothing. He just held her gaze for a long moment before turning back to the window. That was it. It was the dismissal that broke her resolve. It felt personal now. It wasn't just that he was ignoring a waitress. He was ignoring her, Amelia Vance, a person fighting with every ounce of her being to keep her life from imploding. His silent indifference felt like a blatant display of disrespect, a luxury she could never afford. She felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that comes from desperation. This was her job, her responsibility. Protecting the sanctity of the Gilded Quill was by extension protecting her ability to care for her brother. "Sir, this is the third time I've approached you," she said, her voice now dangerously close to losing its professional veneer. "This table is reserved. We have a waiting list of esteemed patrons. Your presence here without ordering is a disruption." He sighed a barely audible breath and ran a hand through his messy hair. He finally spoke, his voice raspy as if he hadn't used it in days. "I'm waiting for someone." "Who are you waiting for?" Mia pressed, sensing a potential lie. "Marcus Thorne." He mumbled, his eyes still on the world outside. Mia almost scoffed. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Thorne, consolidated a corporate behemoth. Thorne was a legend in Boston's financial circles, a man whose picture was frequently in the Wall Street Journal, always in a perfectly tailored suit. He was the epitome of the Gilded Quill's Cleonel. The idea that he would be meeting this disheveled man was laughable. It was the kind of name you dropped when you were trying to sound important. "Mr. Thorne has a standing reservation." Mia said, her tone clipped and final. "It is for 2 people at 12:30 p.m. It is now 12:28 p.m. And I can assure you his associate would not be seated without him. Our policy is to seat full parties only. She had him. It was a clear, irrefutable breach of protocol. The man must have known the name and was trying to use it." The man, Julian Croft, finally turned his full attention to her. A flicker of something annoyant surprise crossed his features. "The policy is inefficient. he stated simply as if observing a flaw in a piece of code. "The policy," Mia retorted. "Her patient's completely gone is the rule, and you are breaking it." This was the point of no return. Mr. Henderson was now off the phone, his hawk-like eyes beginning to sweep the dining room. He would see her in another 10 seconds. She had to act now. She had to be decisive. She took a half-step closer, lowered her voice to a fierce, non-negotiable whisper, and channeled every ounce of her fear and frustration into 5 simple words. "You need to leave, sir." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cold as ice. The man's exhausted eyes widened slightly. He opened his mouth to say something, a protest or an explanation. But at that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. The maître practically bowed as he led in a party of 3 men in immaculate 1,000 suits. The man in the lead was unmistakable. He was Marcus Thorne. His silver hair perfectly coiffed at his face, a mask of confident avarice. Julian Thorne boomed, his voice filling the room. Apologies for being a minute late. Traffic was a bear. He strode towards table 7, and he was looking directly at the man in the gray hoodie. The world seemed to slow down. The clinking of silverware faded. The hushed conversations died. Mia felt the blood drain from her face, leaving a cold, tingling emptiness. Her gaze darted from the stunned, weary face of the man she had just tried to eject to the approaching titan of industry, to her manager, Mr. Henderson, whose face was contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Marcus Thorne stopped at the table, his smile faltering as he took in the scene, his $200 million acquisition target being dressed down by a new waitress. "Mr." The Henderson was suddenly at Mia's side, his hand gripping her arm like a vice. His whisper was more terrifying than any shout. "What have you done?" Mia couldn't answer. She could only stare at the man in the hoodie, Julian Croft, CEO of Ethelred Innovations, the genius whose face she now vaguely recalled from the cover of a tech magazine she'd seen just last week. The man she had just told to get out. The deal wasn't in seconds. It was now, and she had just thrown a grenade into the center of it. The silence at table 7 was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It pressed down on Mia, crushing the air from her lungs. Julian Croft said nothing, his hazel eyes holding hers with an unreadable expression. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his hand half extended for a handshake that would never be met. His 2 associates, shark-like men in pinstripes, exchanged confused, uneasy glances. Then Mr. Henderson moved. He shoved Mia aside with a force that made her stumble, a low growl escaping his lips. He practically fell over himself, apologizing to Julian. "Mr. Croft, 1,000 apologies. 1,000,000. This is a new employee, a grievous, unforgivable training error. Amelia, you are dismissed. Get your things and get out of my sight now." The words were like bullets. Dismissed. Get out. They hit Mia with physical force. Her legs felt weak. Her vision tunneled until the only thing she could see was Henderson's apoplectic face. Fired on the spot in the middle of the dining room. The humiliation was a hot, searing flame. But it was the look on Julian Croft's face that truly broke her. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smug. He just looked tired. He slowly pushed his chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished hardwood floor. He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The graveling manager, the stunned corporate titan, the terrified young waitress. "It's fine," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of finality. He looked at Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, I don't think this is going to work out." Thorne's jaw dropped. "Julian, what? Don't be ridiculous. It's a misunderstanding. With the help we can know." Julian interrupted, his voice cutting and clear. He wasn't just talking about the lunch. Everyone in the room understood. He was talking about the deal. The $200 million acquisition of Ethelred Innovations by Thor Consolidated. It's not going to work. He pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket and laid it on the table, a stark contrast to the pristine white linen. It was an insult, a gesture so dismissive it was more powerful than any shouted word. Without another glance at anyone, he turned and walked away. He passed by Mia, his shoulder almost brushing hers, and for a fleeting second, she caught the scent of coffee and ozone like a late-night coding session. Then he was gone, pushing through the heavy oak doors and disappearing onto the street, leaving a mushroom cloud of chaos in his wake. The room erupted in frantic whispers. Marcus Thorne's face was a thundercloud of fury. "What the hell just happened?" he roared. Not at anyone in particular, but at the universe itself. He rounded on Henderson. "Your establishment, your incompetence just cost me the deal of the year. You will be hearing from my lawyers." Henderson, white as a sheet, turned his volcanic rage onto the only target he had left. "You!" he shrieked at Mia, pointing a trembling finger. "You are finished. You will never work in this city again. I will personally see to it that you are blacklisted from every restaurant, every coffee shop, every hot dog stand. Now get out." Mia didn't need to be told again. She fled, pushing past the gawking staff and patrons. She burst through the kitchen doors, ignoring the confused shouts of the chefs. She tore off the apron, her hands shaking so violently she could barely untie the knot, and threw it on the floor. She grabbed her backpack from a locker, her worn copy of a textbook on algorithmic design spilling out, and ran out the back entrance into the grimy service alley. The cool autumn air hit her like a slap in the face. She leaned against the cold brick wall, gulping in breaths that felt like they were full of broken glass. It was over. The job that was supposed to be her lifeline had lasted 3 days. The money for Leo's treatment was gone. The hope she had so carefully nurtured was gone, and it was all her fault. She had followed the rules. She had done what she was told, and in doing so, she had single-handedly destroyed a $200 million deal and her own future. Tears of shame, anger, and pure abject terror streamed down her face. She had looked at one of the most brilliant minds of her generation and seen nothing but a vagrant. Her judgment, her perception, everything had been wrong. The weight of her failure was absolute. Sinking to the greasy pavement of the alley, surrounded by the smell of garbage and shattered dreams, Mia Vance finally let herself break. The next 48 hours were a blur of gray. Mia's tiny apartment felt like a tomb. The city noise outside sirens traffic. The distant laughter of people whose lives weren't falling apart felt like it was coming from another planet. She didn't answer her phone. She didn't check her email. She just sat on her lumpy sofa, the textbook on algorithms lying open on the coffee table, its complex theorems a cruel mockery of her simple, catastrophic mistake. Leo came home from school, his usual cheerfulness dimming the moment he saw her face. "Mia, what's wrong? Did something happen at the restaurant?" She couldn't bring herself to tell him the full, humiliating truth. I lost the job, Leo." His face fell. He knew what that job meant. He didn't ask questions, just came and sat beside her, leaning his head on her shoulder. His quiet solidarity was almost worse than shouting would have been. It was the reason she fought so hard, and she had failed him. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. That night, unable to sleep, she did the only thing that had ever brought her solace. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness, illuminating her tear-streaked face. On the display wasn't a social media feed or a streaming service, but lines upon lines of pristine Python code. It was her thesis project, a passion project, a dream. It was a predictive analytical model designed to identify and assist at-risk youth in the public school system, using publicly available data to flag kids who were falling through the cracks, academically, socially, or economically. It was complex, ambitious, and deeply personal. It was the reason she was at MIT, the manifestation of her belief that technology could be a force for good, not just for profit. She lost herself in the code, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Here she wasn't a failed waitress. She wasn't a disappointment. Here she was a builder, an architect of logic and reason. She worked for hours, refining an anomaly detection subroutine. Her focus, absolute. It was in this world of pure logic that she could forget the illogical, messy chaos of her life. On the third morning after the incident, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Mia froze. Landlord debt collector. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A sleek black town car without any markings was idling at the curb. Standing at her door was a woman in a sharply tailored black suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked utterly out of place in the run-down hallway of their building. Mia opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" The woman's expression was neutral, betraying no emotion. "Amelia Vance. Yes, my name is Elelanina. I'm from Ethel Red Innovations. Mr. Croft would like to see you." Mia's blood ran cold. Mr. Croft, Julian Croft. Why to sue her to personally deliver the final nail in the coffin of her life? Her mind raced through a dozen terrifying possibilities. I don't understand," she stammered. "A car is waiting for you," Elelanina said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "He has requested a meeting at his office now." This was it, the final reckoning. Mia thought about refusing, about slamming the door and hiding. But what was the point? She had nothing left to lose. Maybe facing the man she had wronged was a penance she had to pay. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let me get my shoes." As she followed the woman to the waiting car, Mia felt a sense of surreal detachment, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The car door closed with a solid, expensive thud, sealing her in. The interior was silent, smelling of leather and quiet power. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving her life of failure behind, Mia had no idea if she was being driven to her execution or something else entirely. All she knew was that she was heading straight back into the world of the man whose life she had so spectacularly upended. The headquarters of Ethel Red Innovations was not a building. It was a statement, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of Boston's tech hub. It looked like it had been teleported from a decade in the future. The lobby was a cavernous, minimalist space of white marble and glowing blue light panels. Instead of receptionists, there were sleek, interactive terminals. The air hummed with a quiet, focused energy. It was a world away from the musty, old-world luxury of the Gilded Quill. This was where the future was being built. Elelanina led Mia through security gates that opened with a silent biometric scan and into a private elevator. There were no buttons. Elelanina simply spoke into a small panel. Mr. Croft's office. The elevator ascended with breathtaking speed and silence. Mayer's stomach lurched as much from nerves as from the motion. The doors opened directly into a vast corner office that seemed to hang in the sky with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city. The office was a study in organized chaos. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard covered in complex mathematical formulas and flowcharts. Books on quantum computing philosophy and poetry were stacked on every available surface, and in the center of it all, standing by the window, was Julian Croft. He was wearing the same gray hoodie. He turned as she entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other. The power dynamic was now completely terrifyingly reversed. He was the architect in his sky-high sanctuary. She was the ghost from the service alley. "Ms. Vance," he said. His voice was different here. In the restaurant, it had been raspy and tired. Here it was, come measured and resonant with authority. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured to one of two simple chairs in front of a large, uncluttered desk. Elelanina gave a slight nod and exited the elevator doors, closing behind her with a soft whoosh, leaving them alone. Mayer sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She decided to face it head-on. "Mitt Croft, I don't know why I'm here, but before you say anything, I want to apologize. What I did was inexcusable. I made a snap judgment based on nothing. I was stressed and I was wrong, and I'm deeply, profoundly sorry for the embarrassment and trouble I caused you." Julian walked over and sat in the other chair, not behind his desk, but beside her, so they were equals facing the window. It was a disarming move. "You were enforcing policy, Ms. Vance," he said simply. "I was being rude and judgmental," she corrected. "I cost you a $200 million deal." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the city below. "Did you?" he asked, more to himself than to her. He turned to face her, his hazel eyes intense. "I didn't bring you here to berate you. I brought you here because I have a question, a real one. Why did you do it? And don't give me the company policy answer. I saw your face." There was something else. The question caught her completely off guard. She had expected a lecture, a lawsuit, a threat, not curiosity. She hesitated, then decided the truth was all she had left. "I needed that job," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My brother is sick. The medical bills are significant. I'm a student at MIT on scholarship, and that job was the only thing keeping us afloat. Your table 7 is the best in the house. The tips from that single table could cover a week of his medication. You were sitting there not ordering, looking like you didn't belong, and every minute you stayed felt like you were taking money directly out of my brother's hands. It was desperation. I looked at you and I didn't see a person. I saw an obstacle. And that was my mistake." She finally ran out of breath, her confession hanging in the silent, sunlit office. Julian didn't respond immediately. He just nodded slowly, absorbing her words. There was no pity in his expression, but there was a flicker of something else. "Understanding integrity," he said softly. "What you have integrity." He elaborated, turning back to the window. "Misguided in that specific moment, perhaps, but your underlying motivation was sound. You were given a set of rules and a responsibility, and you executed on them even when it was uncomfortable. You faced down a person you thought was an obstacle to protect someone you love. You weren't trying to be cruel. You were trying to serve within the system you were given." He stood up and walked to his desk, picking up a tablet. "My company, Ethler, is built on logic, on systems. But systems are only as good as the people who run them. People who can think critically and act decisively. People who aren't afraid to enforce the rules." He looked at her, and a wry smile touched his lips for the first time. "Frankly, Ms. Vance, my head of security could learn a thing or two from you. You got rid of me far more efficiently than most of our competitors have ever managed." Mayer didn't know how to react. A joke. "Was he making a joke, Mr. Croft? I don't." "Julian," he corrected. "And I'm not finished. I brought you here for a second reason. I had my assistant, Elena, look into you after the incident. Amelia Vance, top of her class at MIT. Computer science focus on predictive analytics and machine learning ethics. Your thesis proposal is on a model to assist at-risk youth. He knew. He knew everything." Mia felt completely exposed, as if he had peeled back her waitress uniform and seen the lines of code written on her soul. "I was having doubts about the Thorn deal," Julian said, his voice turning serious. "Deep doubts. Selling to Marcus would have made me very rich. But it felt wrong, like selling a child. I went to that restaurant to think. I was looking for a sign, any sign that I was on the wrong path." He paused, looking directly at her. "And then a fiercely principled, underpaid waitress, who happens to be one of the brightest upcoming minds in my field, tried to throw me out. If that's not a sign, I don't know what is." He set the tablet down on the desk between them. "So I want to show you something, Miss Vance. I want to show you exactly what you saved me from." Julian tapped the screen of the tablet, and a complex series of documents and code repositories filled to the display. This was the deal. He began, his tone shifting from philosophical CEO to that of a focused engineer. On the surface, it was a straightforward acquisition. Thorn Consolidated acquires Ethelred Innovations for $200 million. I stay on for a 2-year transitional period. Our flagship AI Oracle gets integrated into Thor's global logistics network. Everybody wins. He swiped through pages of dense legal jargon. The lawyers went over it for months. My tech leads vetted their integration plans. Everything looked clean. He paused, zooming in on a particular appendix in the contract, Appendix C7. A section on proprietary code, escrow, and verification. This was Thorne's big sticking point. He insisted that before the deal was finalized, his team needed to run a compatibility and security audit on Oracle's core kernel. We would place the source code into a secure third-party escrow. They would run their diagnostics, and once it was verified as stable and secure, the money would be wired. Mia leaned forward, her earlier fear replaced by a burgeoning academic curiosity. This was the language she understood. "That seems standard for a tech acquisition of this size," she said. "It is," Julian agreed. "And that's why we missed it. The deception isn't in what's there, but in how it's framed." He switched the view to a window filled with code. It was elegant, complex, and beautiful. It was the heart of Oracle. "This is our baby. Oracle doesn't just process data, it learns. It anticipates. Its core value is in its predictive heuristic algorithms, the very thing you're studying. It can predict market shifts, supply chain disruptions, even societal trends with startling accuracy." He then pulled up another window showing the diagnostic script Thorne's team had submitted for the audit. "This is their verification tool. My team reviewed it. It looks like a standard stress test. It bombards the Oracle kernel with data checks for memory leaks, assesses processing speed, and logs the output." He looked at Mia, his eyes searching hers. "They told us it was a benign diagnostic, but I had a nagging feeling. Something felt too neat, too perfect. Marcus Thorne is not a neat and perfect man. He's a shark who smells blood in the water." Julian pushed the tablet towards her. "Look at it. You're a fresh pair of eyes. You're not biased by months of negotiations. You're not blinded by a 9-figure payout. Tell me what you see." Mia took the tablet, her fingers tracing the cool glass. The initial fear was completely gone, replaced by an intense, thrilling focus. This was her element. She began to scroll through the lines of code in the diagnostic script. It was expertly written, clean, and well-documented. It did exactly what it claimed to do. For 10 minutes, she read through it, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was a standard, if aggressive, diagnostic. She was about to say as much when something caught her eye. A single, innocuous-looking function call deep within a data logging module. The function was named log.export transient. Transient logs are temporary, usually overwritten after a session. Exporting them wasn't unusual, but it was the way it was being called. It was linked to an encryption library that wasn't part of the standard package. It was a custom library referenced from a separate file. "Mr. Kraft." "Julian," she said slowly, pointing to the line. "This function here, what library is it calling for encryption?" Julian leaned in, his eyes widening as he saw what she was pointing at. "Thorne's proprietary T-lock encryption. They said it was for securely transmitting the log files to their server for analysis." "Show me the T-lock library file." Mia said, her heart starting to beat faster. Julian navigated to the file. It was obfuscated, meaning the code was deliberately made difficult to read. A common practice for proprietary software, but also a massive red flag in a security audit. "Can we deobfuscate it?" Mia asked. "Give me a minute," Julian said, his fingers flying across a virtual keyboard projected onto his desk. He ran a series of commands, his own powerful software tools attacking the scrambled code. Lines of text resolved themselves on the screen, and then they saw it. Buried deep within the encryption library was a hidden command. The log export transient function didn't just export the performance logs triggered by a specific massive data query. The final step of the stress test, it would create a compressed, encrypted, and near-invisible copy of Oracle's entire core kernel, the source code, the crown jewels of Ethel-Red innovations. This copy wouldn't be sent with the main log files. It would be fragmented into thousands of tiny, harmless-looking data packets and bled out slowly over a period of hours, through a mundane, low-priority network port that no one would ever think to monitor. Once outside Ethler's firewall, the packets would reassemble on a Thornont-controlled server. It was the most brilliant, insidious piece of corporate espionage Mia had ever seen. Thor Consolidated would have a perfect stolen copy of Oracle. They would then declare that the audit had failed, citing some fabricated security flaw. They would publicly withdraw their $200 million offer, collapsing ETH stock price. A few months later, they would launch their own new predictive AI, a thinly disguised Oracle clone, and drive ETH into bankruptcy. Marcus Thorne wouldn't just acquire the company. He would steal its soul for free and destroy his competition in the process. The $200 million wasn't a price. It was the bait for the trap. Mia looked up from the tablet, her face pale. "It's a Trojan horse," she whispered. "The whole audit is a Trojan horse." Julian Croft stared at the screen, then looked at Mia. The exhaustion was gone from his eyes. It had been replaced by a cold, hard fire. "Yes," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It is, and you, Miss Vance, just saved me from pulling it inside the gates." The air in Julian's office became thin, sharp, and intensely focused. The discovery of the Trojan horse code was like a detonation in a soundproof room. Silent, yet utterly devastating. All the oxygen seemed to have been sucked into the tablet Mia was holding, consumed by the brilliant, malevolent lines of code displayed on its screen. Julian, who had been a statue of weary contemplation in the restaurant, was now transformed. He began to pace before the vast window, not with the aimless anxiety of a man lost in thought, but with the score predatory energy of a general moments before a battle. His exhaustion had been burned away, replaced by the cold, hard fire of purpose. "He would have gotten away with it," Julian said, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the polished floor. "It's perfect. It's patient. It's evil. My team, the best engineers, the most paranoid security analysts in the business. They all missed it. I almost missed it." He stopped and slammed his palm softly against the glass, the sound a dull thud against the panoramic view of the city. We were so focused on the finish line, on the 9-figure number, on the sheer relief of being done with the fight, that we forgot to. We were dealing with a snake. He turned from the window, his intense hazel eyes locking onto Mia. She felt a tremor of fear, not of him, but of the sheer gravity of the situation she now found herself in. She was no longer a waitress, no longer just a student. She was a key witness, a co-conspirator in the counterattack that was about to unfold. "But you saw it." Julian continued, his voice softening slightly, becoming analytical. "You weren't on the team. You had no context for the months of negotiation. You hadn't been staring at this code for weeks. So tell me again, what did you see that we didn't?" Mia swallowed, her throat dry. She had to force herself to think, to articulate the instinct that had guided her through the digital labyrinth. "You all saw a forest." She began, the analogy forming in her mind. "A massive, complex ecosystem of a deal. You were mapping the whole thing, checking the health of the canopy, the flow of the rivers, but I was just looking at the trees." She pointed a trembling finger at the tablet. "That one function call logged.export transient. It felt wrong. Not technically, but philosophically. Philosophically." Julian stepped closer, intrigued. "Yes," Mia said, gaining confidence as she entered her own area of expertise. "When you're writing code to build something useful, your priorities are clarity, efficiency, and stability. You want the next person who looks at your code to understand it instantly. But when you're writing code to hide something, your priorities shift. You prioritize cleverness, obfuscation, making things look like something they're not. That line of code was too clever. It was a flourish. It was a piece of poetry in the middle of a technical manual. It didn't belong. It was designed to be overlooked because of its apparent insignificance, and that's what made it so significant." A slow smile, the first genuine one she had seen from him, spread across Julian's face. It completely changed his demeanor, erasing the last shadows of weariness. Poetry, he repeated softly. Exactly. You think like an architect, Ms. Vance, not just a programmer. You look for intent, for purpose, for the why behind the what. That's not a skill you can teach. He strode to his desk and pressed a nearly invisible button on its surface. Eleanor, he said, his voice now crisp and commanding. Get me David Chen and Sarah Jennings on a secure teleconference. Priority 1, and then get Marcus Thorne on a separate line. Tell him I've had a breakthrough regarding the deal. Let him think I'm crawling back. Right away, Mr. Croft, came the disembodied reply. Within a minute, 2 faces appeared on the window screen. A man with sharp features and tired, intelligent eyes. David Chen Ethels, Chief Technology Officer, and a woman with a severe haircut and an expression of formidable calm, Sarah Jennings, the company's general counsel. Julian. What's going on? David asked, his background showing the same minimalist aesthetic as the rest of the company. David, Sarah, I'm here with Amelia Vance. Julian began gesturing toward Mia, who suddenly felt like an exhibit in a museum. Ms. Vance has found something in the Appendix C7 diagnostic script. Something your teams missed, something I missed. David Chen's expression tightened with professional pride and a hint of skepticism. Sarah Jennings' face remained a polite, unreadable mask. Ms. Vance Julian prompted gently, if you would... Her heart pounding, Mia stood and walked towards the desk, turning the tablet so the camera could capture the screen with a clarity that surprised even herself. She walked them through her discovery. She explained the innocuous function called the custom encryption library, the obfuscated code, and the final horrifying reveal of the steganographic routine. She explained how it was designed to bleed the company's core source code out through a port no one would monitor. As she spoke, she watched David Chen's face shift from skepticism to shock and then to a pale, sickened horror. He, the CTO, had been days away from personally handing the keys to their kingdom to the enemy. Sarah Jennings, for her part, leaned closer to her screen, her eyes narrowing as she instantly grasped the monumental legal implications. My God, David whispered when Mia had finished running a hand over his face. It's a digital heist. He was never going to buy us. He was going to gut us. The legal exposure for Thor Consolidated is catastrophic. Sarah Jennings stated, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. This is wire fraud, theft of trade secrets conspiracy. We can bury them. That's the plan, Julian said, his eyes glinting. But first, the confirmation, he nodded to Eleanor, who was listening in. Put him through. The screen flickered and Marcus Thorne's face replaced the others. He was in a lavish wood-painted office, a portrait of old money arrogance. A smug, confident smile was plastered on his face. Julian, good to hear from you. Thorne boomed, his voice dripping with condescension. I trust you've come to your senses. Don't worry, the offer still stands. We'll just have to deduct the cost of my lunch from the final price. Julian let the silence hang for a beat too long, forcing Thorne's smile to falter just a fraction. Marcus, he began, his voice dangerously smooth. I've been giving the deal a lot of thought, specifically our security protocols. Yes. Can't be too careful, Thorne said, recovering his swagger. Exactly, Julian agreed. I was just having my team review Appendix C7, again, your diagnostic script. It's a very impressive piece of work. So thorough. Only the best for my future assets, Thorne said with a chuckle. It's the Talak encryption that really fascinates me. Julian continued, circling the trap. Proprietary, of course. I can only imagine the genius it took to write it. Tell me, Marcus, does the name for that come from Thorn Lock? Or is it short for Trojan Lock? The blood drained from Marcus Thorne's face. The sudden stark terror in his eyes was visceral. His smug mask didn't just crumble, it shattered into a million pieces. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. But the lie was pathetic, transparent. Julian didn't need to press. He simply nodded to an off-screen camera. Mia, David, and Sarah's faces reappeared in small windows beside Thorne's. My CTO, David Chen, has been admiring your handiwork. David, please share your professional assessment. David, his face a mask of cold fury, leaned into his camera. M. Thorne, your script contains a steganographic data exfiltration routine that activates on the final query of the stress test. It is designed to copy the entire Oracle kernel and transmit it in fragmented packets through port 44, a port typically used for low-priority system updates. It is the most flagrant act of industrial espionage I have ever witnessed. And my general counsel, Sarah Jennings, has been reviewing the relevant statutes, Julian added calmly. Based on our preliminary assessment, Mr. Thorne's Sarah said, her voice like chipping ice. You and your executive board are facing multiple federal indictments with potential prison sentences of 20 to 30 years and fines that will exceed the total valuation of your company. We have a full, unredacted copy of your malicious code time-stamped from the escrow servers. The evidence is incontrovertible. Thorne was gasping now, his face slick with sweat. Julian, wait. Let's be reasonable. This is just a misunderstanding, a programming error. We can fix this. What do you want, 300 million? 400 name. Your price. It was the final desperate gambit of a man who believed everything and everyone could be bought. Julian Croft let him finish, then delivered the final fatal blow. The price markers is integrity and it's a currency you're bankrupt in. The deal is off. He looked away from Thorne's pathetic pleading face and addressed his team. Sarah, proceed. Alert the SEC and the DA's office. David, begin a full internal security review. I want to know how this got past us. Julian, no, please, Thorne begged from the screen. Julian made a simple, dismissive gesture. Elela Nena's unseen hand terminated the call. Marcus Thorne's face vanished, replaced once more by the serene, indifferent beauty of the Boston skyline. The war was over. The victory was total. A heavy silence filled the office. David and Sarah nodded grimly and signed off, leaving Julian alone with Mia once more. He walked to the window and stood there for a long time, watching the tiny cars move on the streets far below. He built his empire on theft and intimidation. Julian said quietly, more to himself than to Mia, and he almost added my life's work to his collection. He turned back to her a deep, profound exhaustion, briefly returning to his features, but this time it was mixed with relief. Thank you, he said, and the two words carried the weight of the billions of dollars and thousands of jobs she had just saved. Thank you for seeing the poetry. He motioned for her to sit again in the chair opposite him. So, Ms. Vance, he began, his tone shifting back to business. That leaves us with your current situation. You are through no fault of your own unemployed. The word hung in the air, a stark reminder of the reality that existed outside this glass tower. Yes, sir, Mia whispered. Unacceptable, he stated simply. He picked up his tablet and with a few taps brought up an organizational chart of Ethelred Innovations. With a drag of his finger, he created a new empty box that reported directly to him, the CEO. I have an opening. In fact, I'm creating a new division effective immediately. The Office of Code, Auditing, and Algorithmic Ethics. Its mission will be to serve as the conscience of this company. To be my personal devil's advocate, to analyze everything we build, every line of code we write, every company we consider acquiring, and to find the flaws, not just the technical but the ethical. To ask the uncomfortable questions, to look for the code that is too clever. He looked up at her, his expression serious. It will be demanding. You will be unpopular. You will have to challenge our best engineers and question my own assumptions. The pay, however, will be more than sufficient to cover your brother's medical care for the rest of his life. Your MIT tuition will be covered in full, and you'll receive a signing bonus that will make your student loan balance a distant memory. Mia's mind went blank. She couldn't breathe. Head of a division reporting to the CEO. It was impossible. It was a dream. I'm still a student. She stammered the words, feeling foolish as soon as they left her lips. I haven't even graduated, a procedural detail Julian said with a dismissive wave. We will build your work schedule around your classes until you graduate. I'm not hiring you for your degree, Amelia. I told you that. I'm hiring you for your perspective. I'm hiring you because you have integrity in a world that is sorely lacking it. I need people who aren't afraid to tell me I need to leave the restaurant, metaphorically speaking, when I'm on the wrong path. He stood and extended his hand across the desk. It wasn't a gesture of dismissal, but one of partnership. Your thesis is on using predictive analytics to protect at-risk youth. That's the ethos I want at the core of this company. I want to build technology that protects, not exploits. I can't do that if my own house isn't in order. I need you to be its architect. Tears hot and overwhelming welled in Mia's eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of a joy so profound it was painful. This wasn't a job offer. It was a lifeline. It was a validation of every late night spent coding, every sacrifice made for her brother, every ounce of her being that believed technology could be more than just a tool for profit. Her catastrophic mistake hadn't been a fatal error. It had been a crucible one that had burned away the frightened waitress and revealed the confident, capable architect beneath. She stood up, her posture straight and sure, and took his hand. His grip was firm, a stark contrast to the crumpled $20 bill he'd left on the table that felt like a lifetime ago. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, without a hint of the tremor that had plagued it for so long. "Yes, Mr. Croft, I would be honored. And so Maya Vance's life was transformed, not by a lottery ticket or a stroke of luck, but by a single terrifying moment of doing what she thought was right. Her story is a powerful reminder that our true character isn't defined by the titles we hold or the clothes we wear, but by the choices we make under pressure. Julian Croft wasn't saved by his lawyers or his board of directors. He was saved by a struggling student who saw an injustice and refused to look away. Their journey shows us that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most extraordinary destinations, and that integrity, even when it feels like a liability, is the most valuable asset we will ever possess. If this story of how a single act of courage changed everything resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. For more true-life stories of incredible twists of fate, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. And we want to hear from you. What would you have done in Mia's position? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.